Gav, welcome back to the Razor's Edge.
Thanks for having me back, big chap. I don't know many. I'm trying to think of folk that I'm sure I've spoken to journalists a couple of times at Damnation, but actually been invited back on. So I'm actually interested. I get asked a lot of the same questions when, understandably, when you've met someone for the first time, like, what's the inspiration for Damnation? Why was it in Manchester? Your favourite band that's ever played? So I kind of get used to answering those questions. So I'm interested to see what you come up with for round two.
I've got none of that shit, so you're all right. So it's been a year since we last did this. How have you been keeping?
Fuck. Has it?
Yeah.
Has that really been a year?
Been a year. Been a year.
That's bonkers. How have I been keeping? I can't complain. I mean, in a personal sense, my family's healthy, so, and I've got a job, and obviously Damnation's doing well, so I'm all singing and dancing on that front. And with a festival, I mean, ask me in October or November, is it 7th, if Damnation actually happens, because I'm either going to be completely heartbroken should anything go sideways between now and the festival happening, or if it does happen and it succeeds the way it should. But I mean, let's be fair, we were both at Bloodstock. You can see how quickly things can unravel. I mean, they ended up getting a full British lineup, and then still had 7-8 bands that they had to replace almost on the weekend itself. So I mean, I don't want to be too confident until Carcass, Paradise Lost, Godflesh have all showed up and played.
Fair enough. So you made the most of the summer. You're at Download Pilot. I saw you at a distance at Bloodstock. Good to be back at live shows.
It was good. I mean, it was a bit surreal. Walking into the Download Pilot was a little bit surreal, and being back in that crowd, and suddenly going for, especially, and I don't know if England the mass were a wee bit in, but in Scotland they certainly weren't. In fact, in Scotland at the minute, if you go into indoors, you're still wearing masks. So it was strange to come on a car journey and be like masks everywhere, to suddenly in a Frank Carter and the Rattlesnakes mosh pit. That was the most surreal part of all. When I was in that first bounced about that first mosh pit with all these people around about me, I was like, this is surreal and fantastic. I mean, that's the reason we go to these events. So it was that, and also Bloodstock was an excellent weekend.
Yeah, it's one extreme to the other, isn't it? From constantly wearing masks to you're free and you're in a crowd of 20,000 people.
It was, but it's also, I mean, I can see why people were quite anxious about it as well, and people might have taken a wee bit to get used to, but I felt within half an hour, about, I felt like I was right back and the pandemic had never happened. You know, it was a couple of pints for your pals, and it was amazing how quickly I snapped back into, this is fine, you know, and it seemed, for what I could see, that's how other people felt, because there was no fears as such, but there was like, well, what's going to happen? Are you going to get 10,000 people are willing to crush forward towards the barrier? Are you going to get this almost socially distanced crowd that it stretches off as far as I can see? And it wasn't like that at all. I'm sure there was some folk at the back, but most folk just started where they left off.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's strange because you go into supermarkets and you're still queuing at 2 meter distance, but you don't have to anymore. But everyone's still doing it, which is great. Yeah. No one breathing down your neck. But you went to Download or Bloodstock, and that's not happening. You're just back to normal.
Yeah. It was. I'm sure. I'm sure it'll be strange for some time to come. I mean, up here at the moment, we're doing or about to introduce the whole vaccine passports for venues, and their argument in the Scottish Parliament arguing about like what the definition of a nightclub is at the moment. You know, it's I don't even know how that's going to look or how it's going to. I mean, thankfully that doesn't appear to be happening in England, but I'm sure there's going to be a lot of strange rules and regulations that you'll come out of one nightclub where you've just been sitting dancing around 300 sweaty folk for a few hours, and then walk into Tesco and suddenly you've got a mask on again and you're 2 paces behind wee Jeannie.
So seeing as those summer events went so well, did that give you hope that Damnation Festival will be good this year following that horrendous 2020?
Well, so much. I suppose in a way, I mean, the fact that it happened was the first thing. I've always had the fear that the summer events might happen and there might not be as big an impact on the coronavirus as people feared. Yet at the same time, when you get towards the winter months, and the concerns over people just catching. Excuse me, I'm talking to you. I've actually got a bit of cold myself, but people catching colds and flu, and then if that is passing it even quicker, or there's extra pressure on the NHS and they make any decision like, you know what, well, let's ease up on football grounds and concerts and nightclubs. Let's have a wee 2-week break where the rest isn't happening. Damnation just happens to be slapped bang right in the middle of it.
Yep.
There's still, I mean, as we talk right now, I've got that fear. I mean, I had someone messages last night. Basically, they're coming from, I had 2 people. The other day was somebody from Holland, and last night was somebody from Greece. And the guy was basically asking, should I book my flight now? I mean, he says, Gavin, tell me, should I book my flight? And then I'm like, well, let's put it this way: we're ploughing thousands into Damnation as we speak. We're ordering merch, we're paying for production, we're putting deposits down for bands. So we're doing everything we would be doing if it was 2017, 2018. You know, so I can't. But at the same time, I have no control over what does happen. If there is some sort of spiking into the winter, or we do lose several bands due to another spike with COVID as well. So, I mean, I said to the guy, listen, ultimately, if the flight's is your biggest worry, imagine your flights, but I'm buying the full jet, you know? And if fucking Damnation happens, I'm losing that jet. So, we can only hope dies last day.
Absolutely, yeah. So looking at this year's festival, like all other events, you've suffered the international bands pulling out, etc. Just before Bloodstock, I chatted with Simon Hall, who said he'd probably booked a festival and a half's worth of bands just for this year. So I'm guessing that's about the same for you.
Yeah, well, first off, we had the lineup that got completely lost, the American lineup, the most American lineup that Damnation's ever had, ironically. And at one point was it 16, 17 of the 27 bands were American, and we lost them. Well, we ultimately lost every one of them. The only bands now we have that aren't already based in the UK are Year of No Light, Sylvain, and Regardless Tomber. And the only reason the 3 of them are still together is that was supposed to come over as a package. So that wasn't like 3 individual bands that had whole tours running about. They were supposed to come over the package, which I no longer think is the case here. I think there'll be Damnation exclusives just by the turn of events.
Yeah.
So yes, there was all that. Was the initial festival was booked, then cancelled, then rebooked. We rebooked a lot of the bands, booked back in, and then we slowly lost them all again.
Yeah.
And the British bands, so far, there's been no reason for any of the British bands who confirmed yet to be replaced. But I would be astonished if we made it to the other side of Damnation and there wasn't at least a British band to be replaced. If everybody managed to avoid COVID in the week, that would be, I think that would need to be really lucky with that. So what Simon's saying, technically Damnation's been rebooked twice. I mean, and for us as well, it was similar. I mean, it was the headliners, wasn't it? It was like Pig Destroyer, Wolves in the Throne Room, Bell Witch, Blood Incantation. I mean, all these bands had to go, and Paul Bear or Elder, and they get replaced with the likes of Carcass, Paradise Lost, Godflesh. So good thing that UK's got those bands available, because I think if you were in Spain or Portugal or something like that, you'd have been screwed.
Absolutely. And I was going to say, how hard or easy was it finding those locally sourced bands to replace the international acts?
Well, I'll do the air quotes that folk won't see. The smaller bands, not particularly. I mean, there's the bands were asking to go into Damnation before the American bands pulled out, so it wasn't very difficult to go to some of the bands and say, I don't know, Party Cannon, A Man Must Die, A Woad, Abduction, and say, do you guys want to play? So you can tie that up in a day or two. The Carcass, Godflesh, and Paradise Lost, it's not that they're easy bands to book as such, but there's nothing difficult about it unless the agent or manager makes it difficult. I mean, at the end of the day, you go to Godflesh and you say, you guys interested and available in playing? And they said, yes, we are, here's the fee. And if you say, right, okay, well, we agree the fee, well, here's the production requirements, okay, well, we can meet them, albeit within some sort of compromise because it's a festival. That tends to be that. I mean, the biggest problem, the 2 biggest problems are availability. They're either available or not. And then after that, are you going to fight a wee bit over the fee? And I'm sure we fought over all those fees and found a middle ground that both parties were willing to accept.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, I think despite the lineup changes, the bill is still as strong as it was. Carcass coming in, we all love Carcass and things like that. So I think my biggest issue this year is there'll be more clashes for me than ever before.
Well, I get what you're saying, and a lot of people were saying that it's actually stronger, and that would make sense. It might not be as interesting to some folk because, you know, getting bands that have never played either the UK or Damnation before is interesting. Getting a Blood Incantation and Bell Witch, Wolves in the Throne Room, that is interesting. Not to say that Carcass, Paradise Lost, and Godflesh would be boring, but we've seen them do it. We've seen those bands play Damnation before. However, Carcass are a bigger band than Pig Destroyer.
Yeah.
Paradise Lost are a bigger band than Wolves in the Throne Room. Never mind doing Gothic. And Godflesh are a bigger band than Pallbearer. So I was glad that people could see it strong because it was certainly more expensive. It was a lot more expensive. And then what we did to try and make it as interesting as possible is we got Paradise Lost to play Gothic also, which adds that wee bit of interest to it because it's, well, I've done it once, I think. I've done it in Roadburn a few years for the 25th anniversary, so this will probably be the only time they ever do it again.
Yeah. So when you had to get those replacements in, the bands in, how did it work? Is it just a case of mailing out to agents? Who have you got? Let me know who you've got who can actually come to the UK and play.
Well, for that it was well, no, we don't tend to book bands like that because we know who we're going after. So we just go to the agent and say, "Can we have Carcass or can we have Electric Wizard or whoever it is?" So that's what we did. There was a weird period in between. It was not like we lost Pig Destroyer the next day we went to Carcass. We always knew there was a possibility we'd lose the American band. So there was discussions happening beforehand with a lot of British bands. I'm sure this was happening with Bloodstock too. But then that can get people's backs up, especially agents with big egos and managers with big egos. Like, well, my band suddenly your band's replacement, like fallback. You're like, well, that's not what's happening here. I mean, I get why you're saying it, but it's the result of the pandemic. Yeah. It's like, and I'm sure this happened in all the different countries where festivals were trying to pull together what were called domestic lineups, that they were going back to the German bands or the Swiss bands or the Swedish bands and trying to get them lined up should they lose their American or UK bands. So there was conversations happening in the background that were a wee bit, they were awkward because you were basically saying, can your band sit there in place so when I lose this other band, they're ready to be slotted in?
Yeah.
But we got there in the end. It might have been very difficult if Damnation wasn't Damnation, and you were a newer event, and you hadn't booked these bands before, then they worked with all these agents and managers before. I'm sure they would have been like, you know what, it's just not worth the hassle to just come in like that. But fortunately, Damnation is Damnation, and they get the bands kind of knew what they were lining themselves up for and accepted quite quickly. Because, I mean, had I taken Carcass or Paradise Lost, you know, we weren't that confident we were going to get both. So that was a bit of a result.
Yeah, and you mentioned it earlier, and Bloodstock having those lineup changes right through the weekend. Have you started planning for that in case some of the British bands catch anything? Have you got bands lined up in reserve?
Well, I never even thought about it until I got to Bloodstock. I never even gave it a second thought. I thought once the British band had replaced the American band, that was cast iron lock. Yeah, there was no reason for that band not to play. And then obviously in the lead up to, I mean, a bunch of bands get lost in quick succession in the lead up to it. And then after that, you had the bands that were getting lost on the weekend. You were waking up on the Saturday or the Sunday and bands were getting replaced left, right and centre. Which kind of made me realise, look, that's a real possibility for ourselves as well. We haven't, kind of. What happens as well is, you'll get agents with smaller bands that are readily available that will say, we're here, we're coming. I mean, you'll see even on the Damnation or Facebook forum page, you'll get bands like Hidden Mothers or Dinner Celestial Birds or Harriet. They're basically saying, we're at your festival. Now, you know what I mean? Give us some instruments, we'll get on the stage and play. Yeah. So it can be as straightforward as that. There's no official sort of waiting list at the minute because there is no point saying to grindcore band, you're on the list, and then you lose your post-rock band, you know, because you want the band to come into the place and fit the stage, not just get slapped onto the festival for the sake of slapping them on the festival. We're not going to rearrange all the 4 stages for a replacement band to come in. So, yeah, in our heads, there is an unofficial sort of short list of bands that we can hopefully slide in. And then that'll all depend on the time scale of it. If it happens 2 days before the festival, it'll be a band that you can literally get your hands on that we're heading to Leeds anyway. If it happened, say, tomorrow after this call, perhaps we would try and get something more established because you'd have the opportunity then to have that discussion.
Yeah, and I interviewed Employed to Serve last week, and they're going to be on site. So if anyone pulls out, let's get Employed to Serve on, yeah.
I missed that interview. So they are, of course, they're coming up for, I think they're coming up for both nights as it happens.
Yeah, that's
so that would be good. Employed to Serve are one of those strange bands that they probably should have been in Bloodstock, and they probably should have been back to Damnation by now as well. I was talking to Justin about something else. It's a bit of an odd one. It's like in my head, Employed to Serve are always coming back to play Damnation at some point, but I don't know why that hasn't happened yet. But then the same could be said for Svalbard and Conjurer, who sort of played in that same... the 2016, 2017, those bands have never made a return either. I think sometimes your focus is in trying to make it as new and fresh and interesting as possible. Sometimes the bands that deserve another shot at a bigger stage don't get it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked about the challenges of getting bands on the bill this year. Have you had challenges in any other area thanks to the pandemic? Anything else that's...
Well, there's been the tickets, no selling them, obviously that was great with selling, but we do have, normally you sell a ticket and that's you, deal done, and you don't, I mean, even if somebody was to ask for a refund on any other year or for any other event, it's industry standard. Once you buy your ticket, you've bought the ticket, you know, it's not like, and else, my belief is the reason why that needs to happen is if you just allowed everybody to refund their tickets, it'd be like hotel bookings. People would just snap, your festival would sell it the day you went on sale, because everybody would say, I'll just have that as an assurance, and then I'll ditch it the week before the event, and then the festivals wouldn't happen. So I think that's why you need to commit to it, and you need to know that you've made that money to go ahead and plan your event. But this year, as you know, we have kept refunds open because, well, we just didn't feel it was very fair for people that might have bought tickets to see Pig Destroyer and Mills in the Throne Room who maybe didn't want to see the replacements. So that's been a bit of a slog because it's a manual process for any tickets or any refunds that are more than 2. So you can find yourself in a day, and that's a pretty depressing thing, sending money back to people, you know, as a promoter, sending people their money back. So it's quite a depressing going through that. And then we've got a waiting list, which at the minute's like 1,300 deep. So there's no concern about selling the tickets back to folk, but then you need to let folk know, and people want to know. The whole ticket thing's become a bit of a extra workload that's never been there before. Usually we're just trying to sell the tickets. Once you sold out, you've sold out. But then now you're sort of managing a waiting list, you're managing refunds, and that's a daily process. Being unsure about the vaccine passports.
Yeah.
Well, 1 minute you get a minister saying that there definitely will be, and the next day's colleague is saying there definitely won't be, and you're a bit, we're chatting to the venue, and they're a bit like, we're just kind of waiting for the guidance as well. So that's a pain, because then you find yourself getting dragged in by the ankles to vax and anti-vax, and I'm like, I have no interest. The last thing I want to get fucking talk about on the internet is whether people should get vaccinated or not. So then it's about that. It's as if the festival itself is taking a political stance in it, when it's not. We're just like, well, we're so far down the food chain, we'll just get told by Boris or the university even. It's not going to be myself and Paul deciding, oh, well, that's it, we think you should get vaccinated and get into the venue, or you should just walk into them without it. So we'll see. That's been a pain in the tits as well.
So we know this year will be Damnation's last year at Leeds University, and we'll talk about the move in a bit. But looking back and excluding the fire alarm, are there any memories that stand out from the 12 previous Damnations at Leeds Uni?
Well, so the first one was pretty spectacular. It's getting Carcass in 2008 and being in that balcony, and the best part of 4,000 fans there. I mean, the one in Leeds before, in the Leeds Met in 2007, that was a venue that was I think a little over 1,200, so we'd almost like quadrupled in size. And being in that balcony and seeing that crowd in Carcass there, that year was a wee bit chaotic because we were just learning that venue, which is not the easiest venue to manage. Yeah. But that said, being in that balcony and seeing that crowd in Carcass, that's a standout memory that'll probably stick with me for the rest of my promoting days. Then, probably all the best sets I've seen at Damnation: Dillinger Escape Plan in 2010, Amun Ra, both times they played. Maybe she were in there. I mean, a lot of those sets all happened in that venue as well. I mean, I love the second stage stylist, basically that wee amphitheatre, which is incredible. And no matter where we go, I don't think we'll get a venue as good as that.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of good memories. A lot of bad memories, tough ones as well. You know, but it's a venue. If it hadn't been for the pandemic, we probably wouldn't even have thought about leaving. I think the pandemic, then the podcast, then the time to sit and reflect on it and what Damnation had become, and then the big sellout, and then just like, well, we're not moving just for no valid reason, you know, like we kind of got in our heads that there was no way that Damnation could possibly succeed or do what Damnation did, or was it just a case we never actually gave it that much time and attention? Because within a day of doing it, we found an arena with at least 3 stages. So, aye. It's I don't know. I'm bad for this when I'm talking to folk. I kind of forget what the freaking question was.
It was about your best memories of Leeds Unit, and you've half answered my next question. So, so talking about the move, with year after year having been sold out, and obviously 1,300 people on the waiting list for tickets this year, I guess it's inevitable that you've simply outgrown Leeds now. Is that the case?
Do you know what? In a lot of ways, because there's 2 parts to this. Right? The first is like people have got in their heads now that Damnation is some sort of sells out the minute tickets go on sale. That it could always do 4,000 or 5,000 tickets if it needed to. And you know what? That's a great. Someone who was a bit more sly than me would probably let that illusion stick. But the truth is, it's not been. It has sold out for the last 5 or 6 years, but for many of those years it was the week or the day before. It was like if you went to 1 month before Damnation, there was still a bit of a panic about ticket sales, and then as that the final weeks you would see you'd almost double. You'd do like 500 the week, and then I get 1,000 in the last week. So for me, Damnation's always been a bit of a slog to get those tickets, regardless how good the lineup was. That's this whole new, it's the brand, and Damnation's such a spectacular event, and I would go every year and we're always there. Like, that's caught me a wee bit by surprise. It's a good surprise. I hope it sticks. I hope post-pandemic people do see Damnation as this major player in the UK metal scene, and we can continue to have this support. We've had seen the festival selling out 9 months in advance, but the actual outgrown it bit, you could argue that we outgrew it almost immediately, because our stage, the way that we like to build Damnation, a lot of these stages were just never going to work properly. I mean, trying to put Solstifer in the Riley Smith Hall when people queuing out of the Ocean, and even this year we've got You Don't Know Light will play that, and they're not. I'm going to say You Don't Know Light is bigger band as Solstifer and the Ocean, but you might still have a situation where you've got those guys that you've got a queue out that venue. Downstairs you can put on Ren, the Infernal Sea, who's a 100-year-old man. And no disrespect, I love those bands, but no disrespect to them. If they're playing in Leeds the following night, there's 50 folk there. Yep. That 4th venue takes 600-700 folk, and you're getting people who can't get into it, and then saying to us, they should have played the main stage. That was a bad move on your part. This is crap. Like, so there's a real argument there for what Damnation was trying to achieve. We needed a bigger venue, because we were never really trying to be about just that main stage that could take a few thousand people. Damnation was never supposed to be that. And what was happening is we're kind of limiting the genres that we could put on our stages to what that size of the stage could be. So, yeah, I mean, it was odd to me when we moved, and people were like a bit like, oh, you shouldn't, because people didn't believe we'd growing the venue. A bit like, I've just spent 10 years getting absolute dog's abuse saying that the place was oversold, overcrowded. I mean, we reduced capacity by 1,000 folk. You know, it's after the 2014, because we had a great year, and all I took for 6 months after was abuse about how many tickets we'd sold.
Yeah, so you mentioned we're moving to the Bowlers Exhibition Centre, and it's not a venue I'd heard of before, but then I'm not from Manchester, and neither are you. So how do you go about finding a suitable venue to move into?
Well, we had a broad understanding of the venues in that area where we would, the kind of place we would, if we're going to consider moving, like Nottingham, Sheffield, Bradford, Manchester, Leeds. And there was nothing that ever seemed like it would tick the box for Damnation. And then I had that podcast with Tom Taft, the agent for Sleep, Exodus, High and Fire. And he'd mentioned that there was a hardcore festival called Outbreak that were moving to Bowls. And it got me thinking. I think he mentioned the 6,000 capacity. Now, my understanding was that festival was about the 1,000, 2,000 capacity. So that was the first surprise. But then when I came off that podcast, I went and checked, and I was like, holy shit, this is, not only is it an arena, but it's not like your typical one big hall that you walk into and nothing else available. There's 3 fantastic venues there. Then one wee tiny 4 stage if you were to use that. And it's like, well, okay, it's not the 4 stages that we're used to, but it does give you the opportunity. That 3rd stage is still an impressive 3rd stage.
Yeah.
And it does give you the opportunity then, if you are going to have more than 3,000 fans in the venue, that would be somewhere you could move. And also it's Manchester. I mean, we did start the festival in Manchester, so it wasn't as a, I mean, there was never any, I wouldn't bring it up to Glasgow, and I wasn't going to go take it to London. So I had to sort of tick those kind of boxes. And when we went to see the place, they were ripping up the floors at the time, and it was fucking, I hadn't seen a gig or anything in the best part of a year, and it was still impressive. So I can only imagine how it must look when it's got the full production in it.
Yeah. So the minute you made the announcement, the first thing I did was Google the venue, look at the floor plan, and get an idea for the place. So they've got 4 rooms. One's very small by the look of the website. So you're just going to use the 3 rooms. Is that
yeah, but there's one. They say there's a 4th venue you can use, which maybe isn't much bigger than our 4th venue at the minute, but it's slapped right between the main arena, which I think takes the best part of 6,000 people by itself.
Yeah.
And what would be the 3rd stage. So I'm not even sure how that would work, just with the bleed of noise. Never mind trying to negotiate the queues that would be in and out. You basically need to walk through the main stage crowd to cut through the bottom left and through bars. It didn't make sense. Even in an empty venue, it just didn't make sense. And there'll probably, I mean, we'll need space. That'll probably be an area where you can go and grab a pint and sit down, or for merch or something like that. So yeah, there was that 4th. The other 3 are, as you'd imagine, big arena rooms to look, huge big hollow tin cans. But once they've got the production in it, I'm sure they'll look pretty impressive.
Yeah, and you mentioned production, and obviously the Opeth in 2019, they had to cut down their production to headline. Is that something that this venue will allow you to do, have that bigger production?
Yeah, I mean, this is proper blank canvas stuff. This is like, if you're willing to pay enough, you can have whatever the hell you want. You know what I mean? You could have a huge rotating stage in there if you're willing to go and pay the big bucks. You could have the whole every venue with video walls and screens, and I mean, they'll bring anything into there. It's like if you were going to see, I don't know, fucking Bring Me the Horizon or Bullet for My Valentine or any of these bands, and you go into productions first class. That's what we can offer. I mean, at the minute with Damnation, we're still fighting over drum kits. Because there's nowhere for them to go. So a band comes in and sound checks a drum kit, and then it's like, what do you do with it for the rest of the day? It's like things like that will no longer be a headache for Damnation, because I'll just roll on to the left and roll out to the right, and that drum kit will be gone. But it's like, I cannot wait to get the backline and the spec sheets for bands and not have to go back to them and say, oh, by the way, we can't actually get that banner up. Oh, by the way, we can't actually use your drums. Or if we do use your drums, they're going to have to be a drape over them and push behind some amps because there's no stage wings. You know, it's like we're getting to the kind of bands like Opeth, as you mentioned, that aren't used to going to venues and not getting their own way. And it's a wee bit, I wouldn't say as far as embarrassing, but it's certainly a wee bit, it's an awkward conversation to have, because you're paying the money for them and you're bringing the fans to them, but you're not able to supply, but in this point in their career, something they would see is very basic, and it's not like there's nothing you can do to change that. You can't make those stage wings appear. You can't make the window that's behind the stage become a space for it. It's just not going to happen. So I'm looking forward to seeing what we can do.
Yeah.
And especially with bands like, I mean, I don't imagine Converge are much of a production band, but Ministry will be.
Yeah, absolutely. So the venue also offers this outdoor / tented stage as well.
Yeah.
Have you considered that? Although probably November it's going to be absolutely freezing, but is that an option?
Yeah, I mean, it's weird because there was an S Club 7 show at the venue last week, and it's the first time I've seen pictures of that, but it's the first time I'd actually seen video footage. Fucking, it was even bigger than I remembered. And I'd spoke to someone that went there with his girlfriend, and he said it was unbelievably hot. Like the venue was just so warm. The biggest complaint for people was that. And I was thinking, well, that's handy because it won't be in November. So we'll see if that. I think if you were to put up a tent outside, which we might, our idea was maybe if you've got a couple of industrial blowers just to take the nip out there, and so it's some sort of heat in it. But also, I think once you get a couple of thousand people in a tent, it heats up pretty quickly itself anyway, regardless of the temperature. That's not to say at the minute that's the tent thing's definitely happening. You know, it's like small steps. We need to sell. Let's sell 6,000 tickets first, and then we'll have a chat about the tent.
Yeah, fair enough. So, not wanting to bring up the negatives, but obviously you had a few keyboard warriors out when you made the announcements. The people who object to the change just for the sake of objecting, really. So, and they were a bit vocal about the move away from Leeds. So, was that something you were expecting when you made the announcement? And what
absolutely, I honestly, it caught me by total shock and surprise, and also there's a part of me I thought that I'd uncovered something, because when we moved, I know Damnation wasn't the same size as it was now, but when we moved from Manchester to Leeds, we never heard one comment about moving across. And also, it's almost exactly, to put it in context for myself, moving from Glasgow to Edinburgh.
Yeah,
I mean, it's like a journey that takes you less than an hour, and for something like that, also, I'm as folk will know with this accent, I'm from Glasgow, so I travel to Manchester and Leeds every time there's a venue visit, production meeting, the actual events themselves. And that 5-hour, 10-hour round trip for me is just part and parcel of doing it. And when I go to download Bloodstock, the Ozfest, Art Tangent, 7 hours to Bristol for me, 7 hours back. It's just, that's kind of part and parcel of it. So I never expected for one moment that anybody would, I'm sure that they didn't like the fact of the convenience of just rolling back to their own bed, but I didn't think anybody would actually be put off going to Damnation because it was less than an hour along the road. And then some folk get quite, what surprised me more about it was like, you had folk that were like, oh, we're massive fans, been all your events, we will not come next year. This is my last Damnation. And it was like, the lineup hadn't even been announced yet. Yeah. It was like, I couldn't get that. I said, right, okay, well, if it was, well, I don't fancy it in the arena, or actually, Ministry and Converge aren't very good, so I'm not going to go that. Or like, it's got a wee bit pricey now, albeit the tickets are on sale for the same price as this year at the moment. I could understand any of that, but just I'm not even going to give it a chance. I'm not even going to entertain the idea of going to Manchester. And one woman, when she was questioned about it, said, I'm not going, I go enough to Manchester for gigs. So it was like she goes to Manchester all the time for shows, but suddenly Damnation's that one step too far that she's not going to go. So I never, it got a bit heated with some folk. I kept out of it, or Damnation kept out of it. We never sort of engaged one way or the other than to say we were a wee bit surprised with some reaction. But some folk were quite, we started getting reports of hate speech and malicious comments, and because you were getting guys that were coming in for their patch calling them eyes or wankers and fucking want this, and people were starting to get quite offended. So I'm glad that's everybody's had their saying that sort of died away now, because I can live with. I had no idea there was any ill will between folk from Manchester and Leeds. So there you go, you learn something new every day, as they say.
Absolutely, and we both I travel 3 hours to Leeds. You travel 5. It's amazing that someone's not willing to travel just 1 hour for if that, to Manchester from Leeds for a gig. So it's a strange situation. So the new venue, it's a great opportunity to grow, but I guess there's also the greater financial risk in booking the bigger bands, the higher fees, that sort of thing. Are you concerned with that?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, it is. I mean, there's the first example is, could Damnation and Leeds have booked Converge? We could have booked Converge. Ministry might have been more of a struggle because of the production needs and already knowing what happened with Opeth. What definitely couldn't have happened, unless the tickets were going to go up to £100 each, is you couldn't have had Ministry and Converge. Yeah. And then after that, Pig Destroyer and Paul Bearer and Elder, the Despised Icon and Destruction, that bill would never have been feasible unless the tickets were eye-wateringly expensive in Leeds. So, yes, there is a concern. We know it's a risk. We know that if the fans don't, if we don't sell 4,000 tickets, 45,000 tickets, it's going to be financially quite difficult. We'll still happen. We'll tuck the tail between our legs and maybe go back to Leeds after that. But at some point, I mean, they're all a financial risk, really. Though, I mean, this is a bigger one, but every time you start a Damnation, there's $100,000 in the line straight away. So you need people to come and support. That's why we're blatantly honest about it when we say, please support us. It's like, there's no smoke mirrors here. It's like, if you guys all go out and buy your tickets, we're sorted. We're all good. And, well, so far more than 1,500 people have. So that's amazing. Like a year and a bit before it, 1,500 tickets already gone. It's utterly incredible. So more than 1,000 tickets in the first day. So that's a great start.
So looking forward then, obviously the venue change is the next step in growing the festival, but what are your targets or your objectives after next year's event? Where does Damnation go next?
Well, my feeling is there's nothing. I feel that all the limitations that the venue we're currently in, once they're taken away, there's nothing that we can't achieve ultimately. Now, Damnation isn't going to try and be a 7, 8, 9, 10,000 capacity event, because I do believe that once you get into that realm, you need to book Five Finger Death Punch, Lamb of Gods, the Machine Heads, the Anthrax, they kind of bands that's not the reason you're coming to Damnation. But I think there's a nice level of bands, the likes of the Ministries, the Converges, Neurosis. Maybe a push a big one like Mastodon even, you can start to go to. So that's the first thing, is we're able to get our hands in these bands. Then something that's really starting to strike me is like, once you get 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 fans paying that kind of money, and if you've got that loyal support, you can start doing stuff that's quite special. You remember, we're starting to get into these realms where you're getting bands doing album sets, or bands coming across and doing UK exclusives or debuts. And what would happen with Damnation is that would just compound that. So what you would get is, instead of Damnation getting one band maybe quite special, a Paradise Lost doing Gothic, or a Sylvain coming across and doing our first UK show at Damnation. I think what I'd like to see is lots of that.
Yeah.
Lots of bands that people are like, oh, why won't MD? Like there's a I mean, I assume they're quite small, but there's a band, a post metal band I like called Show Me a Dinosaur,
right? Yeah.
And for Russia, and I don't know if they've ever played the UK before, but that's kind of band We Lost to See from Australia. They're kind of bands that they're incredible, and across black metal and death metal and doom, there's a lot of these bands that are out there, but you can't book them because at the moment they're worth 60, 100, 150 tickets. It costs you $5,000 just to cover the travel, even if they say they'll come to Damnation and play for free. But if you've got 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 fans already paying up and believing in what Damnation trying to do, then you can go and book these bands and you can put them, you just slot them into the bill. Then people can come and still get the huge headliners, but also get these bands that they would literally pay the ticket money just to see them because they've never been in the UK before. And that's what I want. And after that, I'd love to see wraparound events. I'd love to see things happening on the Friday or Sunday that co-promotes with, I don't know, another festival. Let's say the Pelagic Fest, for the guys from the Ocean. They've got a lot of great talent. I'd love to do something like that. Damnation versus Plugik Fest, and have a day with a stage where you've already got the venue and the production in place. The most difficult thing would be for bands like them to get, and then just coming across and sort of piggybacking into a Sunday, a ticket price, I don't know, 25, 30 quid, and you have a few thousand folk come to that. Friday night, the night of Salvation, that's got a nice flavour to it with the special album sets and digging stuff out. So there's a lot. I mean, at the minute, our focus needs to be sell enough tickets to make this arena move work. But after that, we would become the biggest indoor metal festival in Europe, and I think that'd be massive for the UK to be able to say that that event was here. And then from that point, the sky's the limit. I mean, you can, in terms of our scene, you could do whatever the fuck you wanted.
Absolutely. So before we finish, I don't want to leave without mentioning the podcast. So with the festival actually happening this year, and obviously you're busy now with other things, is the podcast still on the table?
It's still on the table. What happened is I went to Bloodstock, and I came away from Bloodstock with a million questions. I wanted to know about the band changes, what happened backstage, like the Devon situation. I wanted to know about 100. Vicky was on holiday at the time, and she agreed to come back on and do like what would technically be her third appearance on the Damnation Versus podcast. But then with her holiday and then Damnation becoming quite wild, and then also announcing the arena move, and everything else in between, I've just not really found the time to say, right, okay, let's get an interview penned in and do it. And I've got I want to speak to the guys for Employed to Serve. I speak to the guys for Ackercock. There's plenty of folk lined up. There's other promoters and managers that we quite willing to come on. So I enjoy doing it, and I've got I have to say that the venue move, the arena move, was down to the podcast. So there has been and also no one will ever tell you, the Damnation brands get stronger and more people are interested because of the podcast. But there's been a coincidental uptick in the amount of people that are getting involved with Damnation and the tickets we're selling. So it must have played some part. And even if it was only for a few tickets, it's certainly worth me getting on and talking an hour worth of shite with somebody if you're going to do an extra 10, 15, 20 tickets because people are coming. And I have actually seen that. I've seen folk on Instagram comment and say, I never actually knew anything about Damnation, but I stumbled onto it through the podcast, and now I bought a ticket to the festival and looking forward to coming. So it's, as much as I enjoy doing them, it's also a good promotional tool. Absolutely. And one that I need to get back to. But at the minute, it's just been a bit chaotic to then also try to fit the podcast back in. But yes, it's definitely coming back.
Excellent. So thanks to the podcast, your face is somewhat known now, more so than ever before. So do you think your newfound fame will affect you being able to do what you need to do on at the festival itself? Do you worry that people will be stopping you all the time because they know who you are now?
I don't worry about it, of course, because I mean you have to take that as a compliment, and the fact that people give a shit. I mean, that's the first and foremost of it. But I went to download, and there was a handful of people who said, "Are you Gav?" And then I went to Bloodstock, and then there was a handful of people per day that were saying, "Are you Gav?" And I was with my wife, who's not very impressed that I'm Gav. So she was a bit like, "What the fuck is actually happening? Why are people coming across and asking, 'Are you Gav?'" I said, it's people I've seen in the podcast, obviously. She's like, "But you've been doing Damnation since 2005. And in 2019, you could walk through the entire fucking thing and no one would stop you. I mean, you'd literally need to see one of your childhood friends before they would be like, 'All right, Gav.'" And I said, "Well, do you want me to see it? What do you want me to say?" Obviously, folk that have it. I mean, there was a few thousand people per episode watching that or listening to that podcast. So that's a lot of people that might have enjoyed it or might want to say hello or give me grief. So, yes, I do believe there might be a few more Are You Gavs at Damnation this year. And no, I'm not. It's like that'll be fine. Like the work at Damnation, if you're a good promoter and you've got everything in place, I shouldn't really have that much to do on the day. I mean, it's all the technical stuff. I don't have any hand in doing that anyway. So if you've got it set up right, I should be able to deal with all the Are You Gavs the day can throw at me. And if they all come with Jägermeisters and pints, I'll be past it long before Carcass take the stage.
So you're only Gav if they give you free drinks, and if they
listen, don't even start that, because if somebody starts bringing me drink, the last thing I need at Damnation is free drink. I have free drink. I have my own drink at Damnation, so I don't be pouring Jaegers down my throat, because I still want to enjoy the festival myself.
Gav, it's been a pleasure talking to you again today, and thank you for coming back and talking to us for a second year.
Always big chat, and keep up the good work with Razor's Edge. I see all the work you guys are doing behind the scenes. I see the Instagram posts going up, all the interviews. So, and metal journalism at the minute, it seems fucking absolutely devoted to Machine Gun Kelly doesn't like Corey Taylor, and Corey Taylor doesn't like Kim Kardashian's arse. And did you see that fucking Kanye West wore a Slayer top? It's nice to see that folk are at least sitting down with some artists and getting some content that people might want to listen or read. So good to keep up, guys.
Cheers, Gav. Thanks for listening. Make sure you keep up to date with future episodes by subscribing to our channels. For more information on this podcast, or for all the latest music news, reviews, interviews and more, head over to our website, www.therazorsedge.rocks.